It only takes a few small mistakes to bring down a plane. That's the tragic reality that passengers aboard Spanair Flight 5022 faced on August 20th, 2008. In what should have been a smooth, routine journey to the Canary Islands, this flight instead ended in catastrophe just 10 seconds after liftoff. How did minor oversights pile up into such a horrific outcome? Today, we're peeling back the layers to understand exactly what doomed Flight 5022. The morning of August 20th, 2008 was an ordinary day for Madrid-Barajas Airport, one of Europe's busiest hubs. Spanair Flight 5022, a McDonnell Douglas MD-82, was readying for a standard hop from Madrid to Las Palmas in the Canary Islands. It's a popular vacation route. Think beach resorts, sun, and sangria. On board were 166 people, mostly holiday makers and entire families, ready for a few days of paradise. The MD-82 was a familiar, reliable aircraft in commercial aviation, and at nearly 26 years old, this particular plane had logged thousands of successful flights. Routine maintenance had been conducted, the passengers had all settled in, and soon it'd be wheels up. So, if everything was so routine, what went so disastrously wrong? That day, Flight 5022 experienced a series of minor technical issues before even making it to the runway. Nothing too concerning, or so it seemed. Earlier in the morning, the cockpit's takeoff warning system had flagged an alert. This is the system designed to alert the pilots if the plane isn't correctly configured for takeoff, like if the flaps or slats aren't set properly. When this alert first showed up, mechanics examined the system and reset it, attributing the issue to a transient fault. A temporary glitch. Nothing to worry about, they said. But this wasn't the first time this MD-82 had encountered technical issues. In the weeks leading up to August 20th, the plane had experienced multiple maintenance alerts, including problems with the takeoff warning system and other warning systems. Yet, each time, the problem was chalked up as minor, or worse, ignored entirely. Inside the cockpit, the pilots of Spanair 5022 were going through their final pre-takeoff checklist. Routine stuff, but with one glaring exception. The takeoff warning system, which should have been double-checked after that alert, wasn't functioning properly. In other words, the plane's flaps and slats, the very devices that help planes lift off the ground, were not set properly. But because the takeoff warning system was down, the pilots had no warning that something was critically wrong. They continued right along with the checklist, unaware that their aircraft was completely unprepared for takeoff. While pilots undergo extensive training and follow detailed checklists, they also rely on systems to warn them of abnormalities. You might wonder, why didn't they just double-check the flaps and slats? The short answer is trust. Trust in the system, in the process, and in the people maintaining the plane. With everyone buckled in, Spanair 5022 began its takeoff roll. It gained speed down the runway, and within seconds, the MD-82 lifted slightly off the ground. But almost immediately, something was wrong. The left wing dipped sharply, and the plane began to veer. It was unsteady, struggling to gain altitude. An airplane fighting against physics, like a bird with clipped wings. Then, only 10 seconds after becoming airborne, the MD-82 stalled. The lack of lift from the unconfigured flaps and slats left it vulnerable, unable to maintain momentum. In a horrifying instant, the left wing dropped further, the nose pitched, and the plane crashed back onto the runway, breaking apart and skidding to a stop in a fiery wreckage. Within minutes, first responders were on the scene. Firefighters, paramedics, and police rushed to what could only be described as a war zone. Wreckage was scattered across the runway, fires were blazing, and there were injured survivors in desperate need of help. One first responder described it as a scene from hell, with debris and fire everywhere. Survivors who were able to crawl away from the burning wreckage did so with severe injuries, while rescuers fought to control the flames and get to those trapped inside. Among the handful who survived, the stories are haunting and vivid. One survivor recounted feeling a whoosh of air and a violent lurch before the impact. In those few seconds, reality blurred and survival instincts took over. Crawling through burning wreckage, trying to find a way out, each survivor faced a surreal nightmare. For one woman, the decision to move her seat at the last minute saved her life. as her original seat was destroyed upon impact. Another survivor, who was badly injured, recalled the intense heat and the smell of burning fuel, with only a sheer will to survive pushing him through the unimaginable pain and confusion. Now, in the wake of such a tragedy, you'd think answers would come swiftly. But with aviation disasters, it's never that simple. The investigation into Spanair Flight 5022 was extensive. Spanish authorities, joined by international aviation experts, combed through every piece of debris, every record, and every possible lead to understand exactly what went wrong. One of the first things investigators zeroed in on was the black box, actually two separate recorders. One is for the cockpit voice recordings, giving insight into what the pilots were saying, and the other is for flight data. These recorders are like the memory of the flight, and they're crucial for reconstructing every second leading up to the crash. As they reviewed the recordings, investigators quickly noted the lack of a takeoff warning system alert and the incorrect flap and slack configuration. But what was even more alarming was the discovery that the issues had been flagged before and dismissed. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern: maintenance logs showing repeated alerts that had been reset rather than repaired. The takeoff warning system failure wasn't new, and in the days before the crash, maintenance crews had noted similar issues, yet they hadn't taken further action. This wasn't a simple case of pilot error or a one-off technical glitch. It was a systemic failure. Aviation systems are designed with layers of redundancy. If one component fails, another should catch it. But here, every layer failed. The takeoff warning system, essentially for safety, wasn't working, and the plane's maintenance log showed a pattern of ignored warnings. In short, Spanair had a safety culture that, in this case, turned deadly. Here's where the story takes a darker turn. Spanair, the airline behind Flight 5022, was no stranger to cost-cutting measures. In fact, they've been facing big financial trouble. And when money's tight, the first things to get overlooked are often, you guessed it, maintenance and safety protocols. It turned out that Spanair had a history of skimping on maintenance, pushing planes back into service with only patchwork fixes. In the weeks leading up to the crash, this MD-82 had been sending alerts for a variety of small issues, signs that the plane was practically begging for attention. But with limited resources and an urgent need to keep flights running on schedule, Spanair had routinely chosen speed over safety. One former employee later shared that Spanair's maintenance culture was essentially, fix what's urgent, ignore what's not. It's a chilling reminder of what happens when profit comes before people. If there's one silver lining to this tragedy, it's that Spanair Flight 5022 sparked some big changes in the aviation industry. Sometimes, sadly, it takes a high-profile disaster to shake things up. After the crash, Spain and other aviation authorities began tightening regulations around maintenance protocols and pre-flight safety checks. One of the biggest changes involved stricter inspections of takeoff warning systems across similar aircraft models. Airlines were now required to verify that these systems were fully functional before each flight. International bodies like the European Union Aviation Safety Agency and the International Civil Aviation Organization adopted reforms aimed at preventing such maintenance oversights from going unchecked. In a way, the tragedy of Flight 5022 led to changes that likely saved countless lives down the line. It's been over a decade since that tragic August day, but the impact of Spanair Flight 5022 lingers. Memorials have been held, monuments built, and families continue to mourn. Spanair 5022 will always be remembered, not just as a tragic accident, but as a lesson, a hard-earned one, and a heartbreaking one, that transformed aviation safety and emphasized the importance of doing things right. And perhaps that's the legacy we're left with. A commitment to never let complacency endanger lives in the sky again. And that's a wrap. So what are your thoughts on this tragedy? Was there a detail that really surprised you? Or maybe you have thoughts on how aviation safety has changed since? Drop your comments below. Before you go, don't forget to check out my recent video, The Surprising Truth About How Airlines Make Money. It's not just tickets. Keep flying high with us. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and be ready for more stories that defy the skies.